Hello there, it's Adam here from Modeshift. In this video we are sharing with you the latest Modeshift webinar that we did with a range of experts from across the country, and the webinar is all about the role of school streets in supporting the wider reopening of schools. So please feel free to have a watch, and if you've got any questions please feel free to contact a member of the Modeshift team.
A school street scheme isn't temporary. As we've said before, it's a year-round permanent restriction on traffic. It's not advisory. We expect all drivers, all cars, all vehicles to adhere to it unless they have an exemption. It's not a one-off special event. There's definitely a place for those events in what we're doing as a group of professionals and in promoting sustainable and active travel. But a school street scheme is not a one-off special event. And really importantly, it's not a ban on driving to school. Many of the people that come to school still do travel by car. We're not saying you can't travel by car. It's more so a ban on irresponsible driving on the roads immediately outside the school gates. The reason we're so strict on this is that Modeshift, along with some of its local authority members, has ambitions for school streets to have its own recognised TRO in the future. And if that's watered down at all, then the sort of case for that is weakened if we don't sort of stick to this quite strict rule on what a school street scheme should entail. Although having said that, we know that in the short term, in response to COVID-19, then there needs to be some relaxation of that in order to help schools safely get pupils back to school, particularly over the next term. So what are they about? First of all, looking at reducing volume of traffic that are using the roads going past the school. Sometimes it's not just about the parents that are travelling, the parents and the families that are travelling to the school. It's about that through traffic or that rat running that's making the space outside of school more dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists. It improves the air quality in and around the school gates. We see in hotspots around the UK where air quality is poorer around schools, so it's about addressing that. It's about increasing the number of pupils that do choose to walk and cycle to school. And then obviously hand in hand with that, it's about reducing the number of pupils that arrive at school by car. So how do pupils travel at the moment? This graph is probably quite familiar with a lot of you. It's the results for how pupils get to school based on the National Travel Survey. So this is for the last 25 years. The current levels, there's another dot that we don't have on this graph at the moment. So the 2018 figures show that walking levels for 5 to 15 are currently 44%, so the same as the previous year. And generally, that's not changed a huge lot over the 25 years. There's fluctuations, but it's not huge percentage shifts. Similarly for car use, but what's more worrying is that those two lines are coming closer together, and we really don't want to see those cross over. We want to see walking staying away from that car use and increasing if possible. Some figures you might be less familiar with, and they're very old now, unfortunately. This is from the school census in 2010. One of the main barriers we often hear to school street schemes is the displacement of traffic and where all the car drivers are going to go if they can't park outside of the school. There's perhaps some reassurance in these figures, and as I say, they are old. They're over 10 years old now, but I don't imagine they've changed hugely. But with the school census, we knew how every pupil travelled to school and had their postcode data as well, so we knew the distances we were travelling. And back then, that percentage of car drivers, we knew that 8.2% of them, so 92,000 car drivers or families across the country, were travelling to school by car, but yet lived less than a 5-minute walk, less than quarter of a mile from their school. Furthermore, further 21.1% of car drivers lived between a quarter of a mile and half a mile. So putting those two together, over 330,000 car trips doing the school run are less than a half a mile from school. Again, it's old data, it's from 10 years ago, but school street schemes would look at capturing those car drivers and giving them better alternatives by walking and cycling. And we know the government has targets for this now. So their target is that by 2025, 55% of primary school children will be walking to school. And school streets are certainly part of that package to help us and the government meet that target. But I mentioned a package there, and it's really important to recognise if you're looking at developing school street schemes for your areas, school streets are just part of the package. And it's interesting to note from other local authorities, and you'll hear from them later, that they include Modeshift STARS as part of that package, in that a school themselves must be doing things, must be taking steps to promote sustainable and active travel options rather than just stopping car use with a school street scheme. And this is the package that we use in our travel plan training. So we say that to really bring about modal shift, we need to have a package of measures that has positive cognitive things, so things like providing people with the correct information and the right incentives to change their travel to walking and cycling and public transport. And we also need to build the right infrastructure for them, so new entrances, wider footways, cycle parking facilities and the things that go with those, and giving them the skills, so bikeability training, pedestrian training. But to really lock in those benefits and the achievements gained from promoting active modes, we need to do some quite difficult things as well. We need to do those negative things that always take attention away from the car and put a negative light on car to some extent. And this is what has been harder for us to achieve over the time that sustainable travel programs have been given. It's not as easy to put in schemes that take away space from car use or put out negative messages about what cars are potentially doing to road safety and the environment. But school streets fall into that category in both the information incentives and the infrastructure and skills. School streets are giving us that opportunity to put some real restrictions in for car use. And never before have we had this opportunity where we've got the political will to make these changes. We've got some public support with the requirements for social distancing and physical distancing at the moment. And we've got the support from the public to make this happen as well. Sorry, that was the first one I said. So the final one is that we finally got the funding to make these schemes happen as well with the Emergency Active Travel Fund and whatever may follow that. So there's a massive opportunity for us to make these real steps now that really do lock in the benefits we can see from increasing active and sustainable travel. So I mentioned this in an early slide, but there are effectively two that merges into three different types of school street schemes that you can implement at the moment. There's the penalty charge notice ones that are either camera enforced or police enforced, and then there are the physical infrastructure closures. Looking at those a bit further, so option one is the enforcement through ANPR cameras. Generally, you would see a camera at each entrance to the school street scheme. Those cameras then detect any vehicle that's entering that zone, and it's classed as a moving traffic offence. So they only take photos of vehicles that enter the zone because that's the offence. There's no offence for leaving the zone. So if there are residents that live within that scheme, they can leave at any point. But if they come back, if they've not got an exemption, that's where the penalty charge notice will be issued. At the moment, that scheme or that approach has only been able to be used in London, but I've put a question mark in there because some of you may have spotted this in social media, or if you're watching BBC Parliament, it might have cropped up during one of the sessions late last week. So an MP asked the question, will the Secretary of State for Transport bring into effect Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act 2004 to enable local authorities outside of London to start to enable school street schemes? The response was very short but very telling. Grant Shapps said, I will. So hopefully, and who knows how long this will take, but hopefully that suggests that shortly outside of London, we'll be able to use ANPR cameras to enforce moving traffic offences and therefore school street schemes. Just for information for the Traffic Management Act, here's the section that it refers to. So essentially it gives the government the power to introduce a new framework for the enforcement of parking, bus lane, certain moving traffic matters and the London lorry ban. They build on and strengthen the successful civil enforcement regime introduced by the Road Traffic Act. So keep your eyes on that one, particularly perhaps not as part of tranche 1 of Emergency Active Travel Fund, but as part of tranche 2 when we're looking to bed these schemes in for the long term. So option 2 is where you use the police to actually enforce the scheme. So there's very little in way of physical barriers, but you have the same sort of signage and vehicles are basically freely to enter that scheme, and it's completely reliant upon the police being present to enforce that scheme and whether or not people are entering that zone. Up in Scotland, this is the approach they use. So this is a scheme from Edinburgh, but they have the added benefit of being able to use flashing lights for their zones. So when the lights are flashing, basically means the scheme's in operation, unlike the schemes in England, where you have to actually have the times that the scheme are open and closed on there. So for me, the ultimate scheme moving forward would be an ANPR camera scheme where you can also use flashing lights. So there's a bit of work to be done there to enable those signs to be used as well. Then option 3 is the physical road closure. So using barriers, and based on the rules that have come through, the changing rules that have come through recently, it could be planters, turtle barriers, various other things, and you'll see those in the later presentations. So physically blocking the road and stopping vehicles from entering and leaving that scheme. And this is the type of scheme that are going to be most likely, particularly as part of Tranche 1, as we try and get as many schemes in as possible in the short term. Just before I move on to the other presenters, I've just got one more thing that I'd like to highlight from a MODESHIFT perspective, really. So we recognise and we absolutely support the huge push for school street schemes at the moment, but equally we recognise that it's not possible to implement a scheme outside every school in the country in the short space of time that's needed to get them up and running for the September term. So in response to that, the Modeshift STARS system will have a new mapping function released into it in the coming week. We're hoping by the end of this week or early next week. And this will allow every school in England, excluding London, unfortunately, because they participate in the TfL STARS scheme instead. But every school in the country, be it primary, secondary, special schools, private schools, they'll be able to freely register on the Modeshift STARS system and create their own 5-minute walking bubble map. And we're calling them walking bubbles because we want every school in the country to create a protective 5-minute walking bubble around their school so that pupils and parents and families can safely and actively get to school. So keep an eye on those being launched in the coming weeks. And to complement those, there's the map, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen now. So that's what the map will look like when it comes out of the system. But to complement that, we'll also have a STARS shop in partnership with Bright Kids, where you can buy bollard covers, railing banners, and laminate floor markings. And that's just the start. We'll be adding all sorts of other products to that in the future. So by releasing this, we're hoping that every school can almost create a voluntary school streets where they don't have the capacity or support to implement a school street scheme, a physical school street scheme in the first instance. Thank you very much. Questions, please.
Okay, I've just took the presentation that I am aware that some people are saying in the chat. I'm aware that some people are saying they can't see the chat. Hopefully you can if you hover over the little chat bubble icon where near the hang up button. If you can see that. If there are any questions, please drop it in there. Alternatively, I would be happy if someone wanted to raise their hand. And like I say, we could take a few questions now. So if you do have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Just having a look through the list, see if it. Okay, Jane Dealey.
Hi, Adam. I don't know if you can hear me. There's definitely no chat bubble on the toolbar. Well, okay. Certainly I'm not seeing one at this end.
That's fine. We'll take it by raising your hand. I'll scroll through the participant list and we'll take questions that way.
Okay.
So if anyone has any questions, just press the raise your hand icon, please. Okay, Mark Tune. You'll just need to unmute yourself, Mark, beforehand.
Can you hear me?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alan. Just on, I'm wondering, in terms of schools going back in September, and the most likely option that's going to be available to us, particularly with the timeframes, is physical measures. So if we've got the expectation that schools are going to be extending the drop-off and pick-off times to significant staggers, these schemes could be in place for quite long periods of the day. And I'm just querying, from our perspective, the local authority, if there's experience elsewhere, whether the physical measures that would need to be in place and then potentially removed, how's that funded?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted there. I think that's probably quite a good question for Adam to hold and bring back to our local authority colleagues who are presenting later in this presentation as well, because all three of the local authorities have implemented these schemes. Some of it could be funded through the emergency active travel measures, but I think it's certainly one to bring those in so they can let you know how they've funded their schemes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We'll come back to that. Just
Adam, I'm just seeing a question in the chat as well from Mark Spilsbury saying, we're always told that there's no spare police resource, but we do have a lollipop lady. Can she close the streets? Again, I think Hackney will be able to answer this quite well later. But if you were looking at one that's looking at a scheme that uses physical measures, I understand that it is volunteers that can close the streets. So the volunteers can put the barriers in place, but they have to be manned throughout the day. Oh, well, sorry, not throughout the day, manned throughout the closure. So there has to be someone physically present at the closure throughout the period that it's closed. But in theory, yes, it could be a lollipop lady if she wasn't then required to be crossing people at that point.
Okay, and I've got another question here from, I think it's Richard Kazaria. Apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly. If you could unmute yourself.
No problem at all, madam. You did very well there. I think the last answer sort of clarified my question in that I'm just concerned about potential conflict for people putting barriers out with motorists and how that's mitigated against. It's certainly something when we've tried to do things like play streets that it's the exception, but when it happens, it's something we need to be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. I was present at a temporary school street closure in Sheffield back in November, and there was the usual conflict between driver and marshal at that scheme. I think it's something that's inevitably going to happen. So it might be a consideration for part of your training of any marshals. I think Jenny, who's presenting later, has talked in the chat there about providing some details of their marshalling scheme for Birmingham. So perhaps Jenny can cover something on that if there's anything that looks at preparing for difficult situations with angry motorists.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. And thank you to everyone. I know there's a couple of people with hands raised in there. Unfortunately, we are going to move on, but please keep hold of your questions and we'll happily come back to them at the end of the meeting. If you want to send them to that events email inbox that I sent the instructions out, that would be really appreciated. We appreciate time's limited, but we equally know there's a lot of pressing questions. So if you do have a question, email it to that inbox and I'm sure Nick would be happy to come back with an answer on that. Okay, if you have raised your hand, if you just select the icon again, it'll take the icon away from your delegate name. That'd be appreciated. And then we're ready to go into the next part of the session. So the next part of the session is implement the school streets, and with a specific focus to COVID-19 and what's going on. So we've invited Caroline Burwell from Edinburgh Economics. Caroline also works with us over on the School Streets training course that we delivered in partnership with Hackney. We are going to hear from Hackney later. So I'd like to invite Caroline, if you want to take control of the presentation, make sure you're unmuted, and away you go.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, I'm Caroline Burwell. I currently work for Edinburgh Economics, but in the past I was the road safety manager looking to put the original schemes in Edinburgh, and I have some experience as well of working with Hackney and other local authorities. So I've got some background over the last few years of doing the type of scheme that Nick has shown us. What I'm going to go through very quickly is some ideas of how to put them in the current times where we're under pressure to put lots of schemes in very quickly for very little money.
Just need to select the arrow on there we go.
Yeah. Right. The background to it. We saw the objectives that Nick had put forward, talking about school streets being used to encourage walking and cycling and to reduce the dependence on the car. But there's a few more objectives to add at the moment. One of the biggest being a request to create physical space outside of schools to allow people, whatever distance it is by the time the schools go back, 2 meters, 1+, and to give that space by maybe removing traffic to do so. We're still looking to encourage walking and cycling, still seen as the safest option to get children to school. But also, especially in cities, people that have travelled with their children on public transport, buses, tube, trams, being encouraged now not to use that. What we don't want then is for many of them to move back to using the car, to encourage them to find walking and cycling options instead. We're also looking, as well as creating space, to make that a non-threatening environment. For many of you have seen of schools going back now, of hand sanitizers, children having temperatures checked. That is all stressful enough without the fear of traffic outside of the gates. We're looking to raise parental confidence to make them feel safe in taking their children back to school. As the numbers increase, then there are more people using the space that's already crowded outside of schools. And lastly, the magic one, to make them low cost, to make them quick, make them easy to deliver, and in large numbers while you're at it, which is quite a challenge, seeing as most of us have been putting 1 or 2 school streets in every 6 months or school year. Now there are requests to put 20 or 30 in 6 or 8 weeks. These are the sort of components that your school street is likely to need to have. You'll need to select schools or prioritize schools. What approach are you going to use, especially if the classic closing the street to traffic is not an option. There'll still be legal requirements, consultations. That'll be a challenge, seeing as the usual drop-in meetings, parent evenings, all of that is not an option. Who are you going to let in and give permits to? What signage are you going to use? Do you have to buy other equipment if you're looking to physically close the road? And if you are closing the road with barriers or planters, do you need marshals or stewards? And also the idea of school space. For schools where you want to provide room for physical distancing, but you can't physically close off the road. And this could be the one opportunity we get to look for these schemes to make them more permanent as the conditions return to a degree of normality. So looking at a possibility of things being permanent in the future. Right, remember this slide right back at the beginning with the more traditional approach to school streets in the UK. We've always told our participants on training courses, well, this is the one you can't do. You can't put a barrier up, you can't get a policeman or someone to stand there. You have to look at other options. But with changes to emergency measure regulations, these options now with barriers are likely to be more back in favour. I've had people say to me, I've got enough money for 4 schools and I've 30 on the list. How do I work out where to start with this, seeing as it all has to be done quickly? Consider some of these reasons for giving schools priority. How many schools will benefit? If you've got more than one, or you have 2 entrances on the same street, consider maybe that would be a good one to start with. Do they already have narrow footways, maybe guardrail in place, so to spill out into the carriageway is not likely to be an option? Do they have, is it a large school, large intake? Are they already having problems with crowding around the gates? So to have more space would be of greater benefit. Do you already have large numbers of pupils coming by car? Were you already prioritizing them through poor air quality? If you allow the traffic to build back up again, are you still going to return to the position you were in before? And if you've got ones where the plans have already been started, why not push those forward quickly, especially if you've done some of the consultation? You could get some quick wins through that one. This checklist is taken from a very useful document. I would urge lots of you to find it. Transport for London have issued what they call Appendix 8. It is a very informative guidance document on putting in school streets in current times. And this is the checklist they suggest that you use for each school. Size and type of school. Is it a primary school? Is it a secondary school? Do you have lots of heavy traffic? So are you considering having to divert the traffic? Will that stop you from closing the road? Do you think drivers will adhere to the closures? Heard of areas where people have problem with play streets. So if you will need to put in closure, do you need to actually put in barriers? Will drivers adhere to that? Is there currently space outside for waiting? If there's not, then they maybe do need the road closed so that people can stand in the carriageway. What's the condition of the footway? Do you have guardrail there? Does it need to be decluttered? You have bins, all the things which push people closer together when they really are looking for more space. And can you make it welcoming for children? Can you make it look as if it's an area they want to be in, possibly by putting up planters or even artwork, just to encourage people to want to stand and use the space that you've got. You still need a legal order in place. If you want to restrict access to the school, and if you want to reallocate road space, you will need a legal order. In most cases, school streets up till now have used an experimental traffic order that allows you to make changes in the first 6 months, which could be useful if you're having staggered start times, and those times may change without having to keep making changes to your legal order. But as part of the emergency measures, DFT have updated the Traffic Management Act section that gave powers under the experimental order to allow you now to put in things under temporary orders. So it may be worth speaking to your traffic management officers and getting advice as to which piece of legislation allows you to get it in as quickly as possible, given that consultation is quite difficult at the moment, and even the need to advertise in the press, newspapers not being published, put street bills up, difficult to go out and do that. So there are some changes which will make it easier for you to bring this about. If you are using an experimental traffic order, what it will allow you to do is it will allow you to make changes in the first 6 months. The order itself will run in total for 18 months. And then you have to decide if to make it permanent or if it is schools where once the situation calms down, it's felt that the scheme is no longer needed, the scheme will then just be able to end, it will elapse. As Nick mentioned, the offence is entering the zone rather than coming out if you are a resident. It also enables you to issue penalty charge notices and fine people for doing it. The biggest challenge is, how do you consult with people? How do you even notify them that you're going to do it? This photo is typical of a lot of schools where there's simply a notice saying it's shut. It's difficult to get hold of teachers. It's difficult to get consultation materials put together and distributed. You yourself may not be working in the vicinity, so you can't even go out and inspect the school or inspect the site. So I think there are need for creative solutions to this, that thinking how you can do it. It's very useful to consider a dedicated email address so people can contact you that way. Use your press office to put out information. You're unlikely to have the opportunity to do the more formal consultation. There's no time. You won't be able to access parents unless you have the school ability to send things out electronically. Consider restricting who you actually notify. Often, I know we've done consultations where we've put notices out through doors in adjoining streets just to tell them. Maybe with this one, you're looking just at the people who are going to be within the zone that you are proposing. And that zone may be bigger than it would be in normal times if you have more than one gate. So you may be putting in a couple of small closures around schools. You need to find out which school gates are going to be used. Find out from your local authority if there are means to get letters or information directly put through the doors of the residents. Give them an option of phone lines, email, of coming back to you to find out. Hopefully for most of these schemes, you're talking small numbers of residents if they are quite short schemes. For the rest, look at what options you have to put up information on street, whether it's correct signs on lampposts, just with information and pointing people perhaps to web pages, banners. Schools will normally be able to tell you how to get hold of their parents, so the parents get some idea also of what is going to happen, whether it's texts, newsletters. There are lots of options. Try and encourage the school to do this part of the work for you, along with the other information they're sending out to their parents. Get them to add in the information on travel to school as well. So you'll be putting up the formal legal signs similar to this, but also putting up in the street possibly information boards and banners if you have the ability to produce them. The more traditional schemes have often given options for people to apply for exemptions. Blue badge holders, carers, a whole raft of people that legitimately probably should have access. But given that with these schemes, you're looking to encourage people to stand in the carriageway, to move and use all of the available space, then you're trying as hard as you can to keep all the traffic out. So if you're sending information to residents, provide them with a letter with their address on it that maybe allows them simply to use that and show it if they have to drive up and into the scheme. If not, look possibly at providing permits if needed. But look at seriously limiting the exemptions. If you're going to allow blue badges in, that again is easier for people standing at barriers. The badge can be displayed, but it would be better if there was an option for them to apply for an exemption just simply by sending in an email to a dedicated email address. But the issuing of permits like this one is the classic Edinburgh scheme, where we issued every resident with a permit with all their information on. It's unlikely you're going to have the chance to do anything as complicated as that. This is where some of these schemes may look slightly different from the more classic school street scheme that Nick was talking about. The top one is what is currently going in Hounslow. It's simply road closed signs and cones and somebody there to marshal traffic, show people they can't go. Bottom right is Westminster. These are turtle barriers again, which are pulled out and put across the road and then pushed back again. Other schemes in Greenwich where they're using planters. I think these ones are permanent, but you could have smaller ones again on wheels or that can be lifted and moved. So you're just creating a barrier that makes drivers stop as they're looking to turn into the street. You may also have to still consider some of these stickers to show people how to keep socially distanced while they're stood outside of schools. That may disappear or be reduced as time goes by, but it's encouraging people to use the full width of both footway and carriageway to spread themselves out. You may also need to change the times of your signs if they are going back on a staggered start to start with. So you might need to look at the option of having an order that runs for a longer period of time. So it could cover from maybe 9 till 11 in the morning, 2 till 4 in the afternoon. But you would have to make sure that your formal signage had the correct times on. So you may need to make changes to that. And the big question is, it's fine if you can get all of this equipment, where are you going to store it? Will the school put it? Is it safe to leave it propped up against a wall next to the closure? Again, that is something you'd have to negotiate with schools. Stewarding or marshalling. I'm not recommending the approach in this picture. I think you possibly need a little more than people holding a road sign up. This may be a more likely option where you have a barrier, a more physical barrier, and that you get the option of finding stewards that will move the barrier to allow vehicles to go in if they are allowed to, and also to put the barrier out and take the barriers away. It could be quite challenging, and I could quite understand why finding people to do it could be a challenge. Some school staff may be willing, and that's what we would like to encourage. Parents, local volunteers, residents themselves. It was suggested earlier, possibly even considering council staff like school crossing patrols if they are not being used at other points. Who recruits them? If you're doing a lot of these schemes, then can you encourage the school to help find people that may be willing to do so? Training, as was mentioned, both playing out, have guidance on how to safely operate marshalling schemes. And also Jenny was offering, they have schemes in Birmingham and she has guidance as well. It is challenging, and I think there may be occasions where people might find it difficult, and if anyone wants to enter and they are exempt, then we're not looking for you to create confrontation. Explain the scenario and allow them to enter. Again, protective equipment, at the very least, some sort of yellow jacket to make themselves visible. Whether there should be no need for anything further. They are not in contact with children, so there's no requirement for a disclosure check. They are there to look after the traffic, not to look after children. But we're not saying this is going to be easy, and I think it's one of the things, the areas that concerns council officers the most is, will people respect the fact that they cannot drive in? Because legally they can't. If you can't get cameras up in time, or you don't have the option of a camera, then maybe considering barriers of some sort may be your only option. Some schools on busy roads, bus routes, options where you can't divert the traffic round, you may need to look at other options. So you would then be looking at how can you increase space outside the school without removing the traffic completely. This school here in Hackney has a long area of guardrail. Even though it currently runs as a school street, it will prove challenging if you're trying to keep people further apart, because you cannot, even if the carriageway is empty, you cannot get on and off the footway. So the suggestion of what's happening in Greenwich. Here you can see the guardrail has been taken away and the footway has been widened, possibly using the parking spaces to give some more space outside of schools. With the more traditional school streets, there's been a lot of emphasis on before and after monitoring, travel to school data, traffic counts, air quality. All of this at current times will be much more difficult to collect. But if you can, if you have got hands up data of how people travelled before, see if it's possible to continue to collect some of that and see what changes there have been and the number of car trips. So you have information if you are looking to make the schemes permanent in the future. If possible, when you look to design schemes, if you can do so that they can be made permanent, barriers possibly taken away, cameras or other measures put in with minimal changes. Also, if they have been gathering air quality data in many of these schools beforehand, can they continue to do it? So you then can show that there have been possible improvements in the air quality that you wish to continue. If you have some of this, it may make it much easier to continue schemes on a permanent basis without the need for too many changes before at the end of the 18-month period. Again, back to the any questions. There will be some notes on this and the recording put up, as Adam said, on the MODESHIFT website afterwards.
Yeah, so thank you, Caroline, first of all. Thank you very much for everything you've done in preparation for today. Really appreciate that. We've got a few questions, and I've been taking a few notes as we've been going through. The first one is Louise in the chat. How long do traffic orders take to process? And experimental or temporary in brackets. In quite another, like a secondary question. So how long do traffic orders take to process?
You can probably get a traffic order in place as fast as you could get the rest of the scheme organised. They shouldn't be too difficult to write. You should have officers within your authority that handle this, that can probably translate it into the right legal format for you. Consider one order that includes every school, so you don't have to. If you're doing 10 schools, you don't have to do 10 different orders. You just put all the schools and the times on the one particular order. You're creating a pedestrian cycle zone. You probably already got some within your authority. So within a few weeks, you should be able to get one in place.
Okay, thank you. The other one is David Wells. You raised your hand in the meeting.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was interested, Carol. When you talked about consultation and you suggested restricting notification to just directly affected residents, are there no regulations or regulations about who or how many people should be consulted? You know, do you not have to consult all the parents at the school?
You don't have to. You can put in a scheme and open consultation and comment for the first 6 months that the scheme is running, and then use that to make changes to it. You can put it out to parents and ask for comment, but one of the things is time is not with you at the moment. You'll be doing most of this during the school holidays.
So you can actually make the changes and consult afterwards as to how it's going, basically?
Yes. Several of the longer term schemes have been put in where you are basically notifying people that this is what is going to happen, and that they have options to make comments in the first 6 months for you to make changes to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I think what we're going to have to do, there's quite a few questions in the chat which are brilliant, and I'm aware that people have got their hands up as well. What I'd encourage you to do is if you could email those questions in. The ones that are in the chat I'm pulling into a separate document, and I'll make a note and I'll send those on to Caroline, if that's okay, Caroline, just the ones that are in the chat now.
Yes,
and we'll hopefully get an answer. We're just aware that obviously we've got 3 more presentations, and we want to make sure that everyone has a fair amount of time. The one thing that Nick has talked about in the chat, and this is a sort of a subtle link, but we've got actually Doolin from Hackney Council, and one of the things that Nick has mentioned in the chat is the Hackney School Streets Toolkit. And they created this resource for people to use. So anyway, I'm going to bring Doolin in now. We do have to share the presentation slightly differently, so just bear with us while we do that. Nick and Doolin, would you like to sort that out now? And then thank you very much, Caroline, for obviously your contribution. Really appreciate that. And like I say, if you do have questions, I'll try and pick them up as we can. Okay, over to Doolin from Hackney Council.
Hi there, just making sure that you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
All right, just give me one moment and I will be able to share.
Yep, I can see that, Doolin.
Perfect, you can see.
It's just loading. Just give it a second. Okay, we've got it on screen.
Great. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Doolin O'Reilly, and I am the Principal Sustainable Transport Planner at Hackney Council, and I oversee the School Streets program. So for those of you tuning in from outside of London, a bit of context. Hackney is a central London borough with about 250,000 people, and it's over approximately 20 square kilometers. Before I get into Hackney's post-lockdown plans for school streets, I'm going to give an extremely brief overview of the history of Hackney School Streets program. So Hackney started out our School Streets program in 2017 with a pilot program of 5 primary schools. They were implemented as time pedestrian cycle-only zones that operated for 45 minutes in the mornings and afternoons to coincide with the opening and closing times of the schools. And they were processed as experimental traffic orders with a trial lifespan of up to 18 months, as Caroline had mentioned previously. They were signed and enforced by ANPR cameras, so you got a penalty charge notice if you entered the scheme and you weren't on the exemptions list. And we did provide exemptions for residents and businesses within the zones. So we saw very positive results from our pilot scheme. And I'm just going to rail off a few quick stats. So traffic went down by an average of 68% across the schools. And people have voiced concerns that this was just displacement, but we've been able to show that actually this was not the case, that the traffic actually was reduced by that amount. The vehicle emissions, so that's NOx, PM, which is particulate matter 10, and PM 2.5 also dropped, and these dropped by 74%. And children's rate of cycling to school at the pilot schools increased by over 50%. So these are very specific stats, but I mention them frequently when speaking about school streets, but it is important to mention the numbers when talking about the success of school streets. And this is both for getting political support and in order for getting funding. So even though I think Hackney has a fairly successful, and we've been able to show how the success of our scheme is run, it's still important to be using these because there is always questions about the outcomes, if they were because of school streets, if they were because of something else, and it is important to show. So based on the success of successful outcomes of our pilot schemes, we made all 5 pilot schools permanent schemes after the 18-month trial period. And the success of the pilot led to 2 advancements and outputs. So firstly, as has been mentioned previously, Hackney provided a significant amount of knowledge sharing material to help share our experience with other local authorities. So these include a free school streets toolkit for professionals, a case-making video, as well as a series of training seminars with MODESHIFT. The toolkit and the video can be found on Hackney's School Street webpage, and I believe later today there's going to be more information about what's next for the joint MODESHIFT Hackney training service. The second outcome of the successful pilot scheme is that we made plans to expand Hackney's School Street program. So in late 2019, we committed to automatically enrolling and evaluating all primary schools in the borough to be considered for participation in the scheme. And then obviously, this spring, COVID-19 arrived on the scene and put a bit of spanner in the works regarding schools' operation, funding, etc. Since lockdown, school streets have been getting a significant amount of attention, as I'm sure that you are all aware. Both the DFT at the national level and TfL at our local level, or my local level, excuse me, have praised school streets and have called for local authorities to adopt the scheme. It's clear that school streets are not only just as important as ever, they are now more important than ever. And they are certainly high on the agenda at Hackney, because even though we have quite a good sustainable travel to school rates borough-wide, there exists a huge potential for increased car use across the borough, which will be the default unless we plan for something else, which we are. So this spring, Hackney applied for funding through TfL's Street Space program to support school streets in the borough. And for those of you who are outside of London, Street Space, the Street State program by TfL, is London's COVID recovery fund for transport. Excuse me. We were recently awarded this funding and we're using it to implement 40 school streets at primary schools across the borough by September of this year. So that's going to have a benefit for 14,000 pupils across Hackney, and it is, I think, 90% of our public primary schools will be covered because we already have 9 in place. So this is an extra 40 that we're adding over the summer. So these 40 school streets are going to follow a very similar approach to our existing school streets. So they're still going to be implemented through pedestrian and cycle only zones. And the school streets will still be delineated by foldable school street signs. They will continue to be assessed as experimental traffic orders, and they will still be operational at the start and the end of the school day. There's a few small changes, largely everything staying the same, but one of the core things that's going to be different is the enforcement approach. So it's clear that we're not going to be able to have ANPR cameras at all of the 40 sites, excuse me. And this is a matter of funding and timescale restrictions. And we're still working through our enforcement strategy. We had started this earlier in the spring by considering all enforcement options, from things like closing down the roads with permanent structures to just having the foldable signs up as our enforcement measures. And now we're in a place where we'll be taking on a dual approach. So our plan is twofold. One, that we have a set of cameras from our existing school streets, and we plan to move them around to sites where they are needed the most. So there could be a bit of juggling cameras depending on need. And then secondary, we are also planning on implementing temporary expandable barriers, which will be provided by Hackney Council, but which will be marshaled by the school community and stored by the school. So it's safe to say that things are fast moving with the School Streets program, and we have very limited days before schools close for summer, which is important for engagement and design. And as well, the new school year will be fast upon us. So it's very exciting, but there is a lot to be done in Hackney, as I'm sure there is the case with other local authorities. So I know I've kind of sped through this. I'm trying to just make up for time to make sure that we can finish on time. So as a bit of a final note, Hackney is committed to being a knowledge share partner for school streets. So please make use of the resources that are that we have provided, and do get in contact if there's something you need. I will provide you with what time I have. And possibly now it's best to just give the rest of my presentation time over to questions.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. What I will just word of warning, Nick's going to be doing a bit of a juggle with the slides here, so just ignore what's going on with the screen while we move things over. If you have any questions, it'd be great to see them. If you could either raise your hand. There's been a few in the chat that seem to be addressed. Lisa Wilkinson.
Questions around the volunteers. I was just really surprised to hear that any volunteers or stewards wouldn't need to go through the checks that you would normally expect, a DBS check, etc., when they're going to be working in regularly in close proximity to children. I just wondered if Hackney had done that or gone along the same lines as the lady from Edinburgh had said, where it's not necessary.
Yep, thank you. Dylan, are you able to come back on that?
Yeah, so in terms of the volunteers, our first port of call is the school. So we are hoping that the school, through their staff, are providing their volunteers. We are accepting, or we would accept, excuse me, volunteers from the school community. So, that could be parents, that could be residents of the street, etc. But Hackney isn't going to be taking on the role of organizing those marshals. So we can provide information about what they should be doing, etc. But we're not going to be recruiting them. We are getting them to get in contact with the school. So the school is organizing the marshals, and we are just providing support on the road management aspect of that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Partly, so presumably the school in recruiting, if you like, the volunteers and stewards. I mean, if the school staff, they would already be checked, but then that lies with that responsibility lies with the school then.
Yes, that is our standing so far. As I said, our gold standard, what we are aiming for, is to have it have the school staff be marshalling. So we are hearing back. We've been contacting schools for the past few weeks, and we are expecting to hear back from all of them. I think we only have a couple left, about if they are willing to provide staff to marshal the barriers. So that we'll be progressing with. If there are a few schools that would be taking in external volunteers, we'd be kind of working with the school about what the expectations were with safeguarding, etc. at that point.
Thank you. Apologies. Spoke over there. Thank you, Dylan. We've got one question from Paul McConnell, which we'll take very quickly, and then we'll go into the next presentation. So, Paul McConnell, just need to unmute your microphone if.
Sorry, Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. It's a follow-on question, Julian, really. If the school do recruit them, or it's a member of the local community, or in our case, we're a rural authority with parish and town councils, if we get a suitable volunteer, whose insurance covers them?
I'm not sure if you ended your question or just got cut off, but I can take that as, I think, the full question. So in terms of what the marshals are doing, I think something important needs to be made note of, and that is that they are not stopping traffic from entering the zone. So only the police, uniformed police officer can stop traffic. So that is not the role of the marshal. The role of the marshal is that the council can authorize a competent person, because we are the owner of the scheme, to have someone move the barriers. So that is put them on the road and take them off the road and stand with them. So their role is not stopping the traffic. It is it's informing the public about what is happening and moving around the barriers. So I think that's important to note, because there's concerns, I know, about confrontation between drivers who might be trying to get into the zone and the marshals, and I think that really needs to be clear on the outset that it isn't their role to be stopping traffic. They don't have the legal authority to stop someone from breaking this law. So I think that's the first thing to note. In terms of liability, that's something that we're looking into with the school first, but it is in regards to them just standing by the signs, moving the signs, and giving the information public. It is not in relation to them stopping traffic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Doolin. Big thank you for obviously all the preparation you've done today. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to Leeds City Council to see what their local approach has been. And we've got Lindsay McGarvey. If you could take control of the slides, Lindsay, and obviously unmute your microphone, we'll be ready to go.
Thanks, Adam and Nick, and a big thank you to Doolin there. That's a hard act to follow. So and I've no shame in saying that we certainly had a good look at your scheme and pinched a few of the ideas, and certainly a big thanks to Dave Kearney in Solihull as well, who provided us with lots of advice, and we certainly couldn't have achieved ours without having a look at the other authorities. So a big thanks to everyone. It's a huge effort, and it's great to see these taken off. So similar to Doolin, I'll just give you a little bit of a roadmap to how we started the scheme. So I think pioneering was one of the words that I read. Apparently we've had play streets in Leeds since 2011. And that's really, I guess, the stepping stone to get to school streets in the first instance. In 2019, we had 11 school play streets, which is a bit of a hybrid for Clean Air Day. So similar to play streets, but based outside schools to celebrate that national event. And that worked really well. We got lots and lots of really good feedback from not only the schools, local councillors and residents and the pupils themselves. So after that, we had planned to offer school play streets as a bit of a stepping stone to the full school street offering by allowing schools to test these, see if it fits for them, see if it worked, and if it would be useful to use that to consider the full school street closure. Then all of a sudden COVID hit. So our response was to miss that middle sort of step out and just go straight to the full school streets as a way to help with social distancing and the schools to get back. So we pretty much launched 6 school streets in around about a 4-week turnaround, which was really tight. It involved a tremendous effort by everyone within my team and within the traffic engineering teams, and it really was pulled together very quickly. So what we've got is I'll call it a light model. And I'll expand more on that later on. So we wanted to launch on the 1st of June for the schools returning. And again, just to give us a bit of an insight into a much fuller scheme that we could do perhaps for September, and that would be phase 2. So we had six primary schools included. 4 of those had previously participated in the Clean Air Day closures, so we were familiar with the street layout with the school, and that was quite key to being able to roll those schemes out so quickly. So you can see in the top slide there, probably not very in detail, the 4 schools were quite simple closures, so perhaps a dead end or one street. This one here is 2 streets, and we were able to close those quite easily. We had 2 complex sites, and I think this is where our greatest learning has come from, where we closed multiple streets around the school. And that's been quite problematic for us, and that's been a huge learning curve for us. So a key lesson for us is to keep it small. And we had that advice from Solihull, so yeah, it's definitely something that I would pass on to other authorities. So our traffic engineers were very heavily involved in the TROs. So we looked at experimental first off, but we felt because they were already operational in other jurisdictions, it might not be possible to go down that route. We have got a couple of quite challenging residents who have used legal powers to investigate particular closures that we've done in the past. So I think that might explain why our engineers have been quite cautious in our approach. Permanent orders would take at least sort of 6 months of consultation. They might not be supported because you have to go out to consultation. And again, we had learned that lesson from other authorities. So we just didn't have the time to go out and use the permanent route. So we ended up with temporary traffic regulation orders, and that's under section 14, and that's intended for public safety. What we intend to do is during the 18-month trial is we'll start the work to make it a permanent TRO. So we'll start doing that shortly. We'll look at all the feedback that we've had from each site, work out if that's what we want to do, and if we can take that forward. So that would be our route to making that TRO permanent and to be able to roll it out so quickly. So the operation is a little bit of a tricky one, I guess, because what I'm hearing from others in this presentation is the word closure, and the advice that we've had from our engineers is that it's not a closure, it's an access restriction. So they weren't keen to include bollards, either retractable bollards or barriers, and I think the term pedestrian and cycle zone is a little bit misleading because it isn't a closure, and there needs to be that expectation that there could still be traffic travelling on the road at say 20 miles an hour, and that's from those who are permitted access, i.e. the residents or the businesses. And we also didn't want to encourage use of the carriageway by pedestrians for that reason. So really what we were offering was additional road space for those who want to cycle or scoot in, rather than the spill out of pedestrians similar to maybe a play street. Only the police can enforce, so again we wouldn't expect any of our staff to be able to issue any tickets for that. And the access and exemptions, blue badge holders, emergency services, and then permit holders. So we wrote to all affected residents within the school zone and offered them a permit, one per household, and if they required additional permits, they could write to us or contact us, and we would send a permit out to them. It was quite challenging because that was really at the start of COVID. We didn't have access to the office as often as we could, and that was quite tricky. So we'll definitely go down the route of having a permanent permit holder, a permanent permit system in place to help us administer that. Now, marshalling, again, quite a few questions that I've heard today around this. West Yorkshire is one of the, I think, only 2 counties or 2 districts that don't have CSAS powers at the moment. And that's a delegated power from the police, which would allow volunteers or marshals to move barriers onto the road to allow access. So we don't actually have that ability to do that. So CSAS is the Community Safety Accreditation Scheme, and that delegates power from the police. So that's something that we're investigating currently with the police to find out if we can gain those powers and perhaps be able to put barriers out on the street and remove them when traffic needs to enter. So that's been quite a process for us as well, and that will be ongoing, but I think most other authorities should have it, and that might answer some of those questions about who has the authority to do that. So we've got 2 types of signage. We've got the installed, so we'd call it permanent signage, with the zone, the permit holder exemption, and our logo. We then have the red and white temporary sign, which we've placed on the side of the road. So again, on the advice from our engineers, we're not closing the road. We don't have that authority to do it under this restriction. So we've placed the sign as close to the footpath if we haven't space to put it on the footpath, and placed a cone. What we also did was have staff out on site to raise awareness of the new restrictions. As vehicles tried to enter, they would perhaps point to the sign, wearing high vis, just to give it a little bit more prominence that there has been a change in the road restrictions. And we had some banners outside the schools prepared as well. So there's an example for you too. We used comms and media quite heavily to get word out about the scheme. On the left there's a sample version of our permit that we posted out. We very hurriedly put our website together, and we had some packs that we sent out to schools that could be disseminated to parents. So there's a picture here of one of the sites, and includes a link to the park and stride schemes that we set up to help those parents who might still have to drive, so that they still have an option to be able to do that. We got some really great feedback on Twitter from councillors and residents, particularly residents who had issues with traffic levels in the street, noise, door slamming, driveways parked over, those kinds of things. And I remember it was something that David from Solihull that had mentioned to us, is that if you go out perhaps with the intention of a full TRO and you do the consultation, people might not actually be as receptive to it. Whereas if you go down the temporary route, you install it, then get the feedback, and most of the residents, as I say, have been very supportive. So that might be a way to approach it, rather than going straight out to consultation, getting the feedback. As an engineer, I know how difficult that can be sometimes. So moving to phase 2, we hope to have around about 10, if not more, school street closures starting off in September. And we'll very much use the lessons from phase 1, and as I said earlier, expand the scheme and make it a much richer offering. So the objectives again are just a little bit more wider. We'll be able to not just look at social distancing, but to include active and sustainable travel, and help assist foster that through training, and working with the school and the parents and carers. I think we'll go with the same TRO style, and Access permits, as I've said, we'll move towards formal permits where it's an online application. We'll notify residents to say you have to apply online, show that you live in the street and that you have a vehicle. The hours of the operation, we had varied hours, and I think that caused us quite a few problems in terms of the sign manufacture. So possibly we might move to more standardised times just to assist with that rollout. Might not work. We still have a little bit to do on that piece. Hopefully we'll move towards more of a limited area. We've now got criteria around location. We want schools to demonstrate commitment. That's really important for us in terms of getting people to marshal and to help us roll the scheme out. It was very staff intensive for us. So we feel that that's the key to be able to roll out more. We looked to the Emergency Active Travel Fund to fund some of this. We didn't have time for before or after consultation or evaluation or monitoring. Sorry, we were doing some after monitoring. But I think because the traffic levels had dropped so much during COVID, it wouldn't really have made sense for us to go out and do any counts around the schools, but that's something that we would probably consider going forward. Again, with the sign marshals, we definitely want school staff or volunteers to allow us to roll that out. Again, just to make the scheme a lot richer, we need to improve, look at frequently asked questions, lesson plans, videos, training videos, those kinds of things as well. So the EOI requirements for phase 2, so this is really what we're asking schools to present to us. Our closing date is Wednesday this week, and we've put some tight timescales in there because obviously it's the end of school term coming up, and we still need to engage with schools throughout that holiday period. So we need some commitment from schools to say that they'll have someone who can help us during that time. So the EOI is an application. We've asked quite a few questions around school opening times, access to parking, number of staff, to help with some of those permit type questions that we had. We also want mode of travel data and a requirement for schools to either have a travel plan or be a member of Modeshift STARS. So hopefully we'll sift through the schools that apply on Wednesday and then inform the schools. I think that date's slightly incorrectly, sorry, it's not the 27th of July, I think it's the 17th. And we'll notify schools if they've been successful or not. So that's really it in a nutshell. Sorry, it's been so hurried. I'm absolutely more than happy to help anyone with any other questions that they might have, and I really would love some advice from you guys too.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. That's fantastic. We've got a question in the chat, which is from Helen Harris. Have there been many complaints from the surrounding roads due to displacement? Do you normally include them in consultation?
We've had a few complaints. It's an odd time though, because at the 6 schools that we've carried out the school streets, there hasn't been a great deal of pupils returning. So it's a very it's not a great time to roll it out at the moment. I think in September we'll learn a lot more again in that second phase. So what we've found is that perhaps parents are walking to school to include their daily activity, or they just haven't returned to school. So we would expect some displacement, and that's why for phase 2 we really want to up the ante in terms of park and stride, walking maps, and working with the school to disseminate through to the parent that we're trying to get active travel up and car use down. So yeah, of course we will expect some displacement.
Fantastic. Sorry, I didn't mean to advance that. I was trying to get my bar up on screen. Dave Wells has his hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, it's me again. Just a quick one. It seems that the instigation for these schemes seems to come from the local authorities themselves. Can schools or local councillors take the initiative here, or has it got to come from the transport authority?
For us, the purpose of that EOI is for schools to apply to us, and we want them to demonstrate commitment. So, be members of MODESHIFT or have a travel plan and be able to offer marshals to make sure that the parents will be informed and that they're right behind the scheme. So yeah, we would expect schools to apply from phase 2 onward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry, David.
Just saying thank you. Thank you.
All right, cool. Right, so that concludes, obviously, the presentation from Lindsay. Thank you so much for taking the time. We're going to move straight into a presentation from Birmingham City Council, Jennifer Coombs. So, Jennifer, if you'd like to take control of the slides and unmute your microphone.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks, Lindsay. I can fully appreciate the amount of work that goes into this in such a short space of time. We've certainly learned a lot from other authorities. We found Hackney's toolkit a really good starting place for us to put some of our schemes into place. So Caroline and Nick asked me to give a bit of an overview of some of the wider works that we've been doing in Birmingham to support schools, in addition to closing the road. I'll also talk a little bit about our approach to car-free school streets as well. Okay. So in Birmingham, we've used the term school streets to define more widely what we believe all streets around schools should look like. So they should put children and families first. They should encourage walking, scooting and cycling, helping to keep people safe and healthy. In a perfect world, all schools would be completely free of motor vehicles, but we know that not all schools are appropriate. So some might be on a main road, some might be on a bus route, or there might be other community facilities in the area where access is required. Schools that aren't suitable can still benefit through MODESHIFT STARS, which many of you will know about already, and Nick's talked about earlier. So as a prerequisite to any schools that we work with, we ask them initially to sign up to MODESHIFT STARS and to write a travel plan. So this helps to establish how many pupils are currently travelling, and also highlights any issues or barriers to sustainable travel. It also empowers a whole school community approach, which can be far more sustainable than just us, the council, coming in to deliver a one-off scheme that might just last for a couple of weeks without any real longevity. And it can also help to evaluate the success of any sustainable travel initiative that's delivered. So as part of our package, we've developed additional training packages with associated lesson plans and resources which are available to school staff. And we've done this on various topics, including road safety, clean air, how to use MODESHIFT STARS. And more recently, we've been delivering these as webinars to groups of school staff. We've also developed a suite of resources which is available to schools under the banner of School Streets. The schools can then tailor the most appropriate solution towards helping to reduce congestion and the associated risks outside of schools, whilst at the same time creating environments that are more conducive to encouraging travel to school by foot and by bike. And I'll just give a quick overview of these resources now. So the first one is called Slow Down School Streets. We've already got 4 quite large 20-mile-per-hour speed limit areas in Birmingham, and as part of our transport plan, we want to make 20 mile per hour the usual limit on all residential roads and outside schools throughout the whole of the city. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time to get there. In the meantime, though, we can still be promoting the slow down message around all schools. Initially, when we launched the campaign, a lot of people came to us with complaints that it's not working, you know, and they were saying, how can we promote this message further around our own community or at our own school? It should be a whole community approach. It shouldn't just be about the police or the council telling people to slow down. And we know that the message particularly works well if it comes from children themselves. So we developed a toolkit with resources to enable this. Within this toolkit, we've got lots of different activities that the schools can deliver. So there's a courtroom drama and mini parade and competition, all things which are designed to bring greater awareness to the importance of slowing down. And we've worked with partners and communities, we've linked in with existing events and delivered a series of activities which can then generate stories for press coverage and social media. West Midlands Police have also been really active in publicising prosecutions for speeding through their social media channels as well. The next toolkit that we've developed is Keep Clear School Streets. So this is about taking action to tackle inconsiderate, dangerous or illegal parking around schools. And in Birmingham, as I'm sure is the case in many other parts of the country, this is one of the most common issues that schools contact us about. And obviously the problem is that there's just too many cars on the road, particularly at the start and end of the school day. We know that in order to make a long-term difference, campaigns always work best if we do some education first and then follow it up with enforcement activity, either by the police or council enforcement officers. So within this toolkit, we've got lesson plans, assembly plans, we've got banners to put up outside the school, a parking pledge template and things that children can take home to work with their parents. And then after the school have done that, we can then look at doing some enforcement. The next one is Switch Off School Streets. So as part of our clean air strategy, we've been working with partners to support the journey to cleaner air. And one of the priorities set within this strategy is about embedding behaviour change. So we're supporting schools who are seeking to reduce the exposure of their children through a range of interventions. So the Switch Off initiative supports the schools with an anti-idling message, and again we've got a banner within that which has been designed by a Birmingham school child. There's some creative activity ideas. We've got a Junior Clean Air Cops initiative which gives children the chance to thank drivers for switching their engines off or thanking those who are walking or cycling to school. And as part of this, we're asking children to come up with a poem as well, just to give a bit of greater awareness around this message. And then finally, Car-Free School Streets. So this is the name that we use in Birmingham for the scheme that we've been talking about this afternoon. So whereby the roads outside schools are closed or restricted to traffic at the start and end of the school day. So residents living on the road can request an access permit, and there's also a few other exemptions. But ultimately, we encourage everyone to consider if their journey by car is necessary during these times. So we've been piloting this at 6 schools in Birmingham since September of 2019. And we're going to deliver this scheme at another 6 schools in September 2020. And this has been the plan for a while, despite current circumstances. So we've delivered this in a similar way to Leeds. We ask any interested schools to initially submit an expression of interest, and then we apply a 2-stage selection process which assesses their appropriateness for the scheme and the priority. Within our criteria, we look at the location, and then we also look at the level of engagement that the school have had through Modeshift STARS and any schemes or initiatives that they have already delivered to try and encourage sustainable transport to school. So all of the schools that we have worked with and schools going forward are either located on cul-de-sacs, quiet roads, or roads with a maximum of 2 points of entry to the road. In terms of enforcement of these and the compliance, it was acknowledged in the early planning stages that whilst West Midlands Police were supportive, their capacity to actually come out and enforce this would be limited. We knew that just putting in a traffic regulation order and signs wouldn't really get the level of compliance that we wanted to see. We also knew that bollards and cameras weren't viable for us in terms of financial, if we were going to look to expand the scheme as well. So through examining feedback from other areas, it was shown that the initiative was most successful where the effort was made to achieve compliance in other ways. So we've been supporting schools involved to emphasise the closure by using cones or banners. So wherever these are in place, these closure points must be staffed at all times. And as a prerequisite, we require participating schools to recruit volunteer marshals to staff the closure for at least the early stages of the scheme, and then to do reminder activity throughout the term. And as part of our pilot so far, schools have worked with parents to do this, local residents and members of the school, particularly the school building management team as well. We've got a memorandum of understanding that we send to the school, which looks at the things that us as the council will put into place. So the traffic regulation order, the signage of the scheme, but ultimately we are looking for the school to take ownership of this scheme. So there's certain things that they really need to commit to. We've just completed an initial 6-month evaluation of the first phase, and early indications show that walking rates have increased at least half of the schools involved so far. The most significant change was shown at a school in the east of Birmingham, which has shown an increase of 10% in walking rates, which is fantastic. Overall survey results showed that over 70% of the respondents felt that the scheme should continue at the school. A few concerns, I know it's been picked up in the chat, a few concerns were raised about displacement of traffic onto adjacent roads. Ultimately, the objective of this scheme is to make the road immediately outside the school as safe and healthy for the child as possible. So that is our main concern. If there is going to be some level of displacement, obviously we're encouraging parents, if they don't have to drive, to just to leave the car at home. If we're looking at areas where it is causing unacceptable levels of traffic on the adjacent roads, we are looking at potential mitigation measures along with our local engineers. We can look at putting in some minor physical measures around that. Overall, the scheme has been really popular with local residents. In the initial stages, some of the residents felt that these closures would restrict their ability to travel freely. But now it's actually up and running, concerns have been eased, and 80% of the residents stated that they would like the scheme to continue. So we're now working with these initial schools to confirm whether they will become permanent. And then lastly, here's a few photos just showing some of the ways that our schools have been embracing their traffic-free environments. So in Birmingham, we work in partnership with a community benefit society and cooperative who are known as the Active Wellbeing Society, and they've been carrying out some activities that you might see in a kind of a typical play street. So they've been doing some community breakfasts, they've been doing some cycling activities and scooting activities, sort of general wake up and shake up activities. So it's been really popular and involving the whole community in this. So thanks very much for listening, and let me know if you've got any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, so there's some information on the screen if you want to see it for Birmingham. I have got a couple of questions that I've lined up from the chat. One was from Paul Adams, and it's can we have advice on best pavement level air quality monitoring techniques? We found units high up on the lampposts are ineffective. Obviously, I thought that'd be a good question to ask yourself when you've been working on the clean air stuff that you've been working on.
Yeah, so we have been working in partnership with Public Health on this, and they have provided us with some test tubes. They've given advice where to locate these. The majority of them have been within the school site. Because we are still in the very early stages of this, we are yet to really fully analyse any of the data coming back from that. But that is something that I could take back to our public health team and get a bit more information on.
Thank you. And then the other question, if Mark Tune's still available, I did check before he's still in, and it was the first question that you asked after Nick's presentation around funding. Don't know whether you want to come back on and repose that question, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I think a lot of my concerns have sort of been touched on. Particularly with the emphasis is more about the schools. I think from a Warrington perspective, a lot of the other authorities are doing this, have got more staff resource available anyway, and they're bigger and better in terms of perhaps the sustainable travel area. We've got less resources. I am a little bit nervous about if we're going into this now as a restart for COVID, and I don't know at this stage what the attendance times, the staggering of schools as they're coming back in, the ability to plan for this and to run a school street scheme and get it in place for September seems to be more or less impossible. I'm just wondering what other people are actually faced with at the moment, because these are well-established procedures for a lot of the people who've been talking about, and the whole mindset is about engagement with the community and getting the right culture in place around the school. But when we've got to do it really quick, and Warrington doesn't have that culture, it feels for me as though I've got to try and implement these measures. Probably having marshals. I've not necessarily got the schools on board, and the resources are naturally going to come back to, well, is this a justifiable COVID cost? Is it part of the emergency active travel fund? Feedback I'm getting from colleagues is that we're not going to be able to fund everything that we want to do. So it's all feeling very, very difficult for us at the moment.
Yeah, I'm happy to step in there and give a couple of thoughts on that one. I totally appreciate where you're coming from. We do have a very large number of schools in Birmingham, over 450, and a very small team as well. That's why we really do put the emphasis on the schools. We're about encouraging and enabling. We provide these toolkits. There's no way that we could go in and actually marshal any of these schemes ourselves or man them, but we're also almost putting steps into place that schools can follow to do this themselves. And that's why we really do look for schools to be doing as much as they can through MODESHIFT STARS initially, We've also written a bit of a risk assessment around the return to school, thinking about some of these issues and some basic guidance on social distancing as well around the outside of the school. We're not necessarily going to rush in and put in loads more car-free school streets. So I think it's important to have a range of different options which can help to manage expectations.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's clear that for me, I'm getting in my mindset. I've got a broader meeting on this tomorrow, but I think that school streets is going to be difficult to actually implement, to get the schools engaged when a lot of them are starting to break up in 2 weeks' time. I think that it's feeling like it's going to be quite difficult, and it's something that we might need to pick up in September. It's all about getting the emphasis on the schools because they want to do it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. But as I say, there are different things that you can look at and encourage the school to do as well. So I can send links to, as I say, some of the risk assessment stuff that we've put together in respect to return to school.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate a few people have raised questions in there, and I know that there's going to be continued questions on as this goes on. What I'm going to do is just bring the session to a close, just so we're in respect of everybody's time. We do have further information available, and there's some MODESHIFT support available, and that's with Caroline, who presented earlier. So we do have some rates on there. We will be making all of this information available on the MODESHIFT website from this week. So if you do want some more sort of one-to-one or even group sort of support, we can do that, and that can look very specifically at the examples local to yourselves. So please bear that in mind. Like I say, we'll put this on the MODESHIFT website. This obviously has been recorded, and I'm already getting requests on when we're going to publish this and everything else. What we'll do is we'll get it all sorted, and then we'll make sure we can pop the video hopefully onto YouTube. I think it'll probably be the best platform due to the length of the video, but we'll make it known on social media and through the MODESHIFT website. Further questions, please feel free to drop them into that email, events@modeshift.org.uk. And remember, if you want more information about the Stay Safe, Get Active walking bubbles that Nick talked about in his presentation, email him at stars@modeshift.org.uk, and equally keep an eye out on the MODESHIFT STARS platforms such as social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and the MODESHIFT STARS website. I hope that this has been useful for everybody. I'd like to, on behalf of MODESHIFT and the Management Board, thank all of our presenters. I'm sure everyone would be clapping right now if we were in person. But thank you very much to all of our presenters, and thank you to everybody that's joined. We appreciate COVID-19. It's changed the way we do things. Transport is on the agenda like we've never seen before because of obviously what it can bring, and we're excited to see what can happen with school streets moving forward. So my last request is, if you're doing some work on school streets, let us know and let's share it through the MODESHIFT membership base that we have, the news platforms, so everyone's aware of what's going on, and we can really work together as part of that Team MODESHIFT idea that we've built on over the last few years in the convention. It's about us working together as industry professionals, and we'd love to share that with people. So you're more than welcome to leave the webinar now. I will be in here for the last few minutes, just making sure everyone's out okay, and that will bring the webinar to a close. Thank you.